Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be about boundaries and why they're important and what particular boundaries are important for artists and illustrators. And I do want to mention that I'm using a different camera today. This is the first time I've used it and it's an experiment. It's the Canon G7X Mark II. And I usually film my sit-down videos with the Nikon, and lately I've been using the external microphone to help with sound. And this camera has a built-in mic, it's on the front, so I'm hoping that the sound will be better than it was on my Nikon before I got the external mic, but I don't know for sure. And the reason I'm using this is just because if you subscribe to my channel, you will know that I am in the midst of doing a vlog week. And I had this camera out already and my tripod was ready to go, so I just have kind of thrown it on the top of my tripod, and just trying to keep it simple so that I can go ahead and get this video made. So hopefully it works out well, and you can let me know what you think, whether you prefer this camera or the other one. We'll see. I think in my dream world I would only have to use one camera and it would just be nice and simple, but I know that's not always how it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the main topic of the video, which is, as I mentioned, boundaries for artists. Now this is something I actually already filmed a video about this a little while ago, but I just wasn't really happy with how it turned out, and I feel like I was still kind of processing my thoughts, so I didn't exactly know what I wanted to say. So I spent more time thinking and put down some notes, and I had planned initially on just kind of going off the cuff and sharing my spontaneous thoughts about it, but I feel like it was something that I wanted to actually take a little bit more seriously. So I spent some time doing some pretty detailed notes for myself. So I do have my computer here, full disclosure, and you may see me glancing down periodically just because I want to make sure not to shortchange the subject, and I feel like it's something that's important, so it deserves the attention. So yeah, and the first subject, the first boundary I want to talk about is working for free. And what I want to address here is deciding if and when you are willing to work for free, if you're not, and what that entails, and kind of all the little ins and outs of that. I feel like a lot of the time you hear, don't ever work for free, you should never work for free, you're devaluing the industry, you're devaluing illustration if you ever work for free. And I think at a principle level that's true, and that's a great principle to follow. But as you know, if you have been trying to make it in this field, and particularly if you're new to the field, that's not always the reality. And sometimes in order to get your work seen, and in order to build a little bit of a client list, you may need to work for free, or I shouldn't say need to, you may decide that it's in your best interest to work for free. Like you might want to do something for a local newspaper, a local magazine, or a blog that you like. You might actually make the decision that for strategic reasons you are okay with working for free or working for a reduced rate. Now, that being said, if you're going to work for free, you might want to do what Holly Exley refers to as commissioning yourself. And the thought behind that would be that if you are going to be making work for free, you know, you might as well be your own art director and decide what kind of work you want to do. And that's not a waste if you're in that early, well, it's never a waste. Making work is always a good thing. Now, if you decide that you want to do it for a client, and you're also trying to build up your portfolio, that's great, but you might as well do it for yourself. That way you can do whatever you want, and you can be the art director for the project, and you can decide where it goes. And an important thing, if you are going to commission yourself, is to make sure to see the project through. So I think a challenge for some creative people, this hasn't really been a challenge for me. I don't know, I'm a pretty driven person, so usually if I decide I'm going to do something, I do carry it through. But I think it's not at all uncommon to have a hard time finishing a project, so to have an idea and just have a tough time seeing it through. So that might be one reason you would want to work for free or a reduced rate for a client, is because you kind of have the pressure to finish the project. So if you do decide to commission yourself and be your own art director, just make sure you see the project through from start to finish so that you can add it to your portfolio. And if you do decide to work for free or a reduced rate for a client, still make sure that you have a contract. So just because you are willing to maybe be flexible on your payment because you're getting started and you're wanting to build your portfolio, that doesn't mean you should just have no boundaries whatsoever, or that you're going to make the work for free and let the client use it however they want. You should still have plenty of other constraints and boundaries around that relationship to make sure that it is in your best interest and that it works well for you. And on that note, I would encourage you, if you are going to work for a reduced rate, to still ask for some kind of a fee, even if it's just symbolic, even if it's $5 or $25 or whatever. And in some ways, I think, at least if I'm imagining my own experience, it almost feels worse to work for like a tiny fraction of what you want to get paid for or usually get paid for than it does to work for free. But the reason I would encourage you to do that, even if your client is like a nonprofit, or if you're doing it just for your portfolio and you're young and getting started and really wanting to build that up, I think it's still important to ask for some small payment, because that is how you ensure that the client has buy-in. And in my experience, doing work completely for free often results in work that the client isn't really happy with, because if they're getting it for free, they don't really value it, and therefore they don't really invest any time in it. So, even though you're the one making the project, it still requires some investment and work from the client. So they have to think about what they want. They have to look at your sketches and think about whether there are any revisions. They have to give feedback. They sometimes have to give you reference material. And if the client is just getting the job for free, in my experience, they don't really follow through as well on their responsibilities. So, but just by asking them to pay something, you're really ensuring yourself that they're going to look through the contract, that they're going to look through the terms, and hopefully that they'll abide by those more so. Big truck going by. And that's why you want the external mic. Anyway, so you just want to make sure that they are going to abide by the terms and conditions of your contract and your working agreement, and having that payment, even if it's only symbolic, does, in my experience, ensure that they do that more reliably. So the next boundary that I want to mention is related to the issue of contracts, and that is giving away your work. So regardless of what you're being paid, you should define your terms, the boundaries of your agreement, and what you're being paid for, what rights the client is getting, and what you're being paid for. When you make a work, you automatically own it. The copyright is yours, and the client should only get the rights and uses that they're paying you for, or that you've agreed upon in your contract. So just because you make a work for a client, it doesn't mean that they automatically completely own the work. Now, this is true both for private commissions and for commercial illustrations. So for example, if you're being paid for a private commission to, I don't know, draw a bird for a client, and then that client, not only hangs the bird, the painting of the bird in their home, but decides, actually, like, I want to put this bird on mugs and sell it at conventions, that would be definitely outside of the terms of a standard agreement for a private commission. So a client really only, even if they're buying the physical work like they would in a private commission, that doesn't just give them carte blanche to do whatever they want with the work itself. Now, some clients will still ask for way more rights than they actually need, like a magazine who is commissioned editorial illustration asking for a total buyout. They don't need that. There's no reason that they would. It just is sometimes easier to have like a blank, a standard legal form that they send to all of their contractors and vendors. And if you don't read it and you don't know what's in the contract, I feel like I say this in so many videos, but you always need to read your contracts to make sure you know what you're agreeing to. Because even if you think it's common sense that, oh, it's a magazine, they're only gonna need the rights to use it in the issue that they're buying it for, or that they're licensing it for, they may actually have in the contract other uses that you're signing over to them. And if you don't read it, you won't know. So make sure to always read and to understand what rights you're giving to the client, and that those rights are consistent with the amount that they're paying you for the work. And just as you can say no to working for free, you can politely define the terms that you are comfortable with and that you would agree to for a client. So back to the magazine example, if you receive a contract for editorial work that says that it's a total buyout, sorry, muted. If you receive a contract for work that should be for editorial, but in the contract it says it's a total buyout, you don't just have to accept that. You can reply and say, hey, you know, actually, I'm more comfortable with terms like these, and give them some examples of other contracts that you've had for other editorial projects, for projects that are similar to theirs. And on that note, it does help to have some familiarity with what a standard is in this area. So another thing I've mentioned in a number of videos is how helpful the Graphic Artists and Illustrators Guild Handbook for Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. That's a mouthful, but that book is amazing. It's really great to have, and it has good sort of boilerplate contracts and gives you an idea in the different sections of what is standard in terms of licensing. I get lots of questions about this, and there's no way for me to like parse out every single little eventuality. So having a book that you can refer to is just going to be really helpful. And I think it's like 30 bucks, so it's not super cheap, but it really is well worth it. I use it all the time. Anytime I'm working with something that's like a little bit unfamiliar, I just refer to it to make sure that I am in the ballpark for what I should be charging and what rights the client should be getting. It's just really helpful to have. I'll put a link to that in the description box. And continuing on with contracts, I would say is keeping to the terms of your working agreement. So you have in your contract with your client, you're going to have the uses that they're licensing the illustration for, and that's like whether they're going to use it in a magazine, whether they're going to use it on packaging or a t-shirt or whatever, and how long they're going to use it for, where they're going to be able to sell it, all of that stuff. Those are the uses. And then you have kind of like the working arrangement and the working terms that you're going to agree to make the work for the client. And that would be like the timeline and how many revisions they're going to get, the deadline, probably multiple, if it's a big project, make multiple deadlines, like deadline for sketches, deadline for finals, deadline for edits, all of that stuff. And clients, just like they may ask for more rights and uses than they are willing to pay for, they may ask you to work outside of the terms of your agreement. And that's another way that they're getting, that you could be asked to kind of devalue your work and work for free or work for less than you're comfortable with. Because if you have agreed to do 2 revisions, but the client is asking you to do 4 revisions and not increasing the price, and you're not increasing the price at all, then the client is getting work for free. So the number one thing I would say in this area to be successful at holding a boundary here, you have to actually have a boundary. So you can't just think to yourself, oh, well, you know, I'll do a round of revisions at sketches and a round of revisions at finals, and not tell the client. It's easy to assume that they're going to think that something is common sense, and I've talked about this in other videos as well, but just always try to be as clear and straightforward as possible about the process of working, about your working process. So if you're going to offer 2 revisions, make sure the client knows that either in an email or a contract, more than just over the phone. Try to have a paper trail if you can. So, and then spell out, excuse me, when those revisions happen and what usually would be included in each of those revisions. So I just got a question recently from somebody saying that they're in that horrible spot that nobody wants to be in, where they're a good way, like 3/4 of the way through a project, and the client just keeps asking for more and more revisions and isn't paying any additional fee to the illustrator. And now this person feels stuck because they didn't have a contract, they didn't have a working agreement. So this illustrator and the client were not on the same page to begin with. So that makes it really difficult to hold a boundary and say, actually, I'm not going to do any more. I'm not going to do any more revisions until there's an additional payment, additional fee. And yeah, so if you, and sorry to say, sad to say for that person that they really are in a difficult position. At this point, they kind of have to decide how much is it worth to them. Like if they were to just say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't do any more work until I've been paid X. That's one possibility, but they run the risk of losing the client. They could also just cancel the project. But either way, there's like, there isn't really a good way to get out of that situation once you're in it. The best way to avoid that situation is to stay out of it in the first place. So yeah, you want to have that really clear agreement about what the schedule is going to be like, how many revisions there are going to be, and what those revisions include, and then what your fee would be if you go outside of that. So, you know, if you have a standard 2 revisions, then you want to make sure that the client knows that if they go over 2 revisions, you're going to bill at whatever your hourly rate is until those additional revisions are done. So yeah, that way when the client asks for that 1 more revision, you are in the very happy place of being able to say, yes, I'd be glad to, and per the terms of our agreement, this is what it will cost. And then the client can decide whether or not that's worth it to them. So basically you can say yes while saying no at the same time. And it's the only way you can do that is if you have that groundwork laid. So always be clear on your uses and always be clear on the terms of your working arrangement, your working relationship with the client. And again, these things are all kind of interrelated, the payment, the uses, the terms. But the last thing I want to mention is keeping personal time personal. So related to the last point in particular of how clients can sometimes stray outside the terms of your working agreement. If you have a project schedule that's 3 weeks long, ideally that should only be, those 3 weeks should include just your working days and not the weekends and not the evenings. But a lot of the time clients don't get you their pieces by the deadline that they're supposed to get them. So, you know, if you are waiting for feedback from a client, for example, 2 days beyond when they were supposed to get it in, and they get it to you on Friday at 4:30, they're basically expecting that you're going to work the weekend. Now you have a few choices. You can just do it if you're okay with that, and I certainly have done that myself at different points depending on the client and the situation. You could also tell the client that since you received per our timeline, since I received the feedback 2 days late, I'm not going to be able to finish it until, you know, bumping out the ultimate deadline 2 days later. So whatever time you've lost on the client's end, just kind of adding that to the final deadline. Usually most clients won't like that. They want to be able to send in their stuff whenever they want and still get it by the ultimate deadline. And the other option is that if the client is really insisting that they need to have it still by the deadline, you can ask for a rush fee. And again, the graphic designers handbook of pricing and ethical guidelines, they have some good information and sort of standards to go by for how to price your rush fees. So I would recommend that. And I do just want to disclose, honestly, I think I've gotten a rush fee like maybe once. So I don't typically ask, well, or I'll give the client 2 choices. So like I'll say either we can bump the timeline or you can pay this rush fee. And usually clients are begrudgingly okay with bumping the timeline. And as I said, there are sometimes that just, if it's like a really big client or a job that I'm super excited about, or it just happens to work with my schedule that week, there are plenty of times that I just won't even raise it at all. But if you're a person who really values having like very clear working and non-working time, it is possible to hold that boundary with clients. You just want to make sure to, again, from the beginning, be starting out with the timeline so that you can refer to that as kind of your, your foundation with the client. All right, so I think that's about it for this video. If you're new here to this channel and you'd like to see more content like this, please do subscribe and hit the like button. Let me know in the comments if I left anything out, and I will try to address it in future Q&A videos, or maybe a dedicated video depending on what the question is. And I will see you all in the next video. Hope you have a great week. Bye.